Hello and welcome to Arts Insights Live. I'm Aishwarya Jayaraman, Director of Marketing and Communications here at ACG. Arts Insights Live is a LinkedIn Live series featuring candid conversations on trends, data, open positions, and different ideas shaping the arts and culture field. If you're joining us live, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from, and feel free to share your thoughts or questions that you may have in the comment section throughout the session. Arts and culture organizations are increasingly turning to fundraising campaigns to advance long term vision, strengthen capitalization, and build financial resilience. In today's evolving philanthropic environment, successful campaigns require more than urgency or financial need. They demand strategic clarity, financial stability, compelling storytelling, and aligned leadership. This conversation today explores how organizations can determine whether they are truly ready to launch a major fundraising campaign. The session offers practical insights for board and senior leadership teams, considering how preparation, alignment, and early engagement create conditions for sustainable fundraising success. I'm happy to be joined today by Todd Ahrens, Vice President Revenue Enhancement, who has spent decades helping organizations plan and lead major campaigns. Hello, Todd. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself for starters and your role at ACG?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Um, I'm a vice president with Arts Consulting Group, mainly working in our revenue enhancement area, but I also work across our practices, which include strategic planning and capacity building and executive search, research, all of those areas. I've been with Arts Consulting Group since 2020. I started out as a project consultant and then became a full-time vice president in 2022. Prior to joining Arts Consulting Group, I worked for 30 plus years in the arts and education sectors, including both visual arts and performing arts, and mostly in fundraising. And I worked on, I can't remember for sure, but it was, I think, 6 or 7 capital campaigns during my time. And then, of course, translated that over to arts consulting work and working with our clients. So yeah, thank you.
Before we get into the session, hello all joining us from Manhattan, San Diego, Washington. Welcome to the session. So, Todd, getting into the conversation, as you work with institutions across the sector, what conversations do you hear most often around campaign readiness?
Yeah, well, I think it's changing, a little bit, and arts organizations are increasingly looking at capital campaigns or an endowment campaign, not simply as a fundraising initiative, but really strategic tools for long-term sustainability and growth. That's true post-pandemic environment that's really reshaped revenue stability while increasing and raising donor expectations around impact and transparency.
So, what are the broader shifts across the sector that are contributing to this renewed interest in major fundraising campaigns?
Yeah, for sure. So some volatility, right? Earned revenue is less predictable. Operating costs are structurally higher than they were. So organizations again are turning to campaigns to help strengthen that long-term capitalization, resiliency, financial sustainability. Donor expectations, as I mentioned, are more selective than they were before. They're expecting transparency. They want to understand the impact of their giving, and they want to be trusted companions in the work. And so campaigns become a way to articulate a kind of clear vision and demonstrate seriousness, not just need. And I think it's really about being strategic. Campaigns are increasingly seen as tools to advance kind of strategic plans and reposition organizations for the next decade of their work, and not just as one-off, this is an emergency campaign.
Yeah. So, can we say that the idea of campaign readiness has evolved a lot compared to the last 5 to 10 years ago? Like, how does that evolution look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's definitely evolved over the last few years. Many campaigns, were originally driven by immediate capital needs, but now readiness is defined more around financial health, strategic clarity, leadership alignment, and it's also very data-driven planning these days. Multi-year financial models, feasibility studies are now the standard inputs and not afterthoughts. They weren't always the case. Sometimes people rushed into or organizations rushed into a campaign. And most of the time now it's really about capacity, looking at that too, the readiness of human operational technological capacity to make sure that this is that these good ideas are led and not just funded by a few donors, but really by the entire organization and its constituency.
Mhm. Is there like an internal moment or like a particular condition that prompts the organization to start seriously focusing on these conversations?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there certainly are inflection points around this, an adoption of a new strategic plan, a major programmatic or facility vision that's coming in, maybe a shift in the mission or how the mission's being delivered. Looking at both capital and endowment needs, if they're aging facilities or new buildings, what's going to inspire and help to stabilize things going forward. Endowment campaigns are becoming more popular because they're trying to diversify fundraising streams. Um, but also, it's just about leadership alignment, making sure there's a strong board and executive partnership, and that the leaders are aligned and confident and, willing to solicit gifts in this campaign strategy.
Mhm. So while organizations are now focused on the sustainability itself, let's talk a little bit in detail about financial resilience. And that is also a key focus area in the current times. So, how should organizations think about financial readiness before launching a major campaign?
Yeah, I think first maybe starts with liquidity, right? Understanding the current cash on hand and months of available net assets to gauge resiliency over a multi-year campaign. Um, you know, we just want to certainly look at that and model the future, build multi-year projections for both earned and contributed revenue, including costs of new initiatives. We want to understand how the campaign can help operations and not destabilize operations, right? That's the one thing we don't want to happen in a capital campaign, is for something to happen with the operational and annual fund campaign. So we want to clarify any risk and build a runway. And so that's asking, how this campaign can sustain if revenue dips or if costs rise further. So that
So these financial indicators what are the financial indicators which most effectively build the donor confidence during this kind of planning?
Yeah, I think early on, again, it's that looking at the current cash on hand signals stability, or year-over-year annual funds with no deficits, and the ability to weather any volatility during a campaign is certainly important. We want to make sure we look at unrestricted capital and how that isn't necessarily going toward operations, but we want to have a very credible financial plan. And, we want to make sure that our assumptions and our cash flows and our reserve strategies are also in place to help reassure donors that the organization is going to keep moving forward and during this campaign period as well.
Mhm. So at this point, how do you think boards can engage more meaningfully in understanding the financial preparedness?
Yeah, boards should definitely regularly be reviewing and discussing all of those metrics, not just year-end surpluses and deficits. They need to be involved in the scenario planning, whether it's the finance committee or special committees, development committees that can test and help test different campaign scenarios for their impact, really, that they might have on the operations, and then help with the risk. Think about the risk boards understand, the financial baseline, they can also endorse campaign goals and speak credibly then with donors about where the organization stands from a financial standpoint.
Mhm. So while the focus on campaign readiness and financial stability continue to be imperative, it's also important to establish the relatability with the donor community, like on the organization's vision and impact. So what distinguishes a compelling case for support from like the traditional fundraising messaging?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think future focused, having it be future focused and not need focused is kind of where we are and should be. Instead of saying we need money, the case answers what will change in our community because of this campaign, and if it's successful, what that will mean. Really, the case needs to be anchored in the mission of an organization. It begins with mission and strategic plan, and guides really all of the preparation throughout the campaign as it advances. And demonstrate community impact. A good case for support will articulate how the goals will benefit the constituencies and the broader community, and not just the institution.
Mhm, mhm. So how does that, you spoke about a strategic plan in an organization. How does that plan translate into a campaign narrative that resonates with donors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for organizations to have strategic plans that can be the pillars behind a campaign, because so much of that's already been grounded in mission work. But whether it's programming or facilities, collections, endowment, whatever the fundable initiatives are, those can be really lifted up in a campaign. And we want to make sure that we're connecting the goals to the outcomes, right? So for each initiative in a campaign, we want to describe the artistic, the educational, the community outcomes that donors will be able to see if they're willing to invest in that. And then also it's about just telling a very coherent story, showing how all of the pieces, all of the pillars come together to create, a vision for the future, and those projects can support that vision.
Mhm. So that brings me to ask you, why do you think donors tend to respond more strongly to the vision rather than just on the organization need itself?
Yeah, I think, donors want to feel like they're helping to advance something, something that's transformative. They don't want to feel like they're just providing money to, make up a structural deficit or something like that. It builds confidence. Donors want to see confidence. They want to see vision-driven cases that the organization is really, planning for the long term and not just surviving in the present. And they want to see value alignment. They want to see the vision and impact, and that helps donors, see their value in the organization's mission and how they can intersect.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you so much. I'm just going to take a quick pause here. And to people who are watching, please feel free to leave your questions for Todd in the comments section, and we'll answer them towards the end of the session. So, coming back, Todd, readiness and feasibility studies function both as evaluation and engagement processes. So, offering insight into donor perception while building early campaign momentum as well. So, how do you think organizations determine an achievable, credible campaign goal? Like, is there like a checklist one can follow to launch an effective and sustainable campaign?
Yeah, good question. So definitely a feasibility study before leaning into a campaign. Um, Feasibility studies that test kind of donor perceptions and philanthropic capacity of potential to support, and what resonates with the vision. Through confidential interviews, data analysis, feasibility studies offer both quantitative and qualitative feedback to the organization about whether or not a campaign can be successful and at what level, right? And to your point about a checklist, I think Yes, I mean, there's always a checklist, but it's about, looking at all of the annual fund materials, looking at the case for support, looking at board leadership, executive leadership, really digging into if the donor base and prospects have been qualified. And so, investment in resources is really key as well, right? We talked about human resources, but organizational data resources, and goals, need to align with both donor capacity and organizational infrastructure. It's not just aspiration that will get a campaign there. So it's really important to have all of those done in advance of really heading into a campaign, again, so that it can be successful.
So, talking about aspiration, how can leadership teams actually balance the aspiration with organizational capacity when planning a campaign?
Yeah, I mean, first, it's about testing assumptions, I think. Independent assessments of, again, the operational needs, the technological capacity, can help right size the ambition a little bit. Um, we can lean into phasing the vision. Larger visions can be sequenced into phases that match both all staffing systems as well as the donor's appetite to support certain projects at a certain time. It can also be affected by other things that are happening in the community, other organizations that might be in a campaign. But really, it's about ensuring that the campaign ongoing programs or the annual fundraising. And we talked a little bit about that. Critical. And that's why so many organizations what we call comprehensive campaigns, which combine both the annual and the capital campaign.
Mhm. So, how early do you think a donor engagement influence campaign? How does early donor engagement influence campaign direction and strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it can certainly help inform the vision. Feasibility interviews surface what excites donors and where they see maybe gaps from an outside perspective, and it can help an organization kind of refine the priorities that they're moving forward. Um, it can also identify leaders. Early engagement is a pre-sell of the campaign itself, right? And it helps identify volunteer leaders and those who are really interested in some of those projects and could help lead the efforts in the community. Um, and it definitely is about prompting other changes, maybe the size of the goal that was originally thought about, or the messaging, or the mix of capital and program and endowment components. All of that can be lifted out of donor engagement early on in a campaign.
Mhm. You did mention early on in the session about leadership alignment. So, what level of leadership alignment is necessary before we move forward with a campaign launch itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really critical that both the staff, executive leadership, and board are all aligned, and they're confident about the programs or what the campaign's going to support. Um, and they're also clear about their roles, like as volunteer leaders, campaign staff. Is there going to be a capital campaign committee? Is it going to be just the advancement or development committee of an organization? What kind of outside counsel can be brought in to help support and prepare before the launch? But really, I think above all of that, right, it's just everybody is sharing the same narrative, right? From the board chair to artistic leadership to anybody that's on staff or anyone that's volunteering for the organization, that everybody is aligned with these are the priorities of the organization and its mission and vision driven.
So, Amy and Sarah, we see your question. Keep your questions coming. Like, we'll be taking them at the end of the session. So, we spoke, Todd, about the different aspects of the broader shifts in campaign planning, the financial health being a big foundation, creating a compelling narrative for donors, and assessing campaign readiness and feasibility. So we can now talk about how this actually translates into a pathway. So successful campaigns rely on structured planning, realistic timelines, and investment to sustain momentum. So what signals indicate an organization is truly ready to proceed at the moment?
Yeah, great question. I think maybe first and foremost is just again that financial baseline and making sure that it's understood and stable. That you've looked at projections going forward. That we've are understanding risk scenarios that could happen during that process. So that's kind of the first thing, and then making sure that the case for support is tested and that it really does come back as a compelling case that inspires donors and resonates with donors moving forward. And the next step is we want to make sure the infrastructure is in place, right? We want to make sure the staff and systems are in place, that there is an implementation plan, that it's ready. Again, we're not just building a campaign and aspiring to have it be successful. It actually is going to follow a path over a period of time to get us there, right? And that roadmap really then, as you build that out, it's about a business plan. It's about having smart goals. It's about making sure our cost estimates are in there as well for how much it's going to cost to run a campaign. I mean, so many times I've seen organizations wanting to raise funding in a capital campaign, but they haven't built in expenses of what that looks like, whether it's staffing, events, materials, all of that. And we want to make sure that our cash flow projections, are all in line as well. So it's about the whole organization coming together, but really, development, fundraising, and finance have to be lockstep in a campaign.
Mhm. So, talking about that, is there one unique thing that distinguishes campaigns that actually sustain momentum over time?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously that they typically run in kind of three phases, but the quiet phase is what everybody refers to in the beginning, and in early gifts in that quiet phase, can really signal confidence as you move forward and finally reach that public phase that we're going through. But typically that strong phase, you're looking for your leadership gifts before you kind of go into the major gift fundraising and then the public phase of the campaign, which is very critical as well for long-term sustainable growth. But really, then it's tracking, it's being disciplined about managing the campaign. There's going to be ebbs and flows throughout a campaign, but it's really making sure that the milestones that you've set in place, that they're being hit. And if they're not being, hit, or we're not achieving those goals at that particular time, then we need to understand why, and we need to figure out ways that we can pick up the pace, so to speak, in the next few months, right? I think at least a quarterly cadence of check-ins and milestones building toward the goal is critical. I mean, I think we need to monitor it much more frequently than quarterly, but those bigger milestones that you might be checking in with the board on go there. And we just want to make sure that the storytelling continues, from beginning to end, that it's not a changing narrative, but it's about progress and impact, and that we're working with our marketing teams to make sure that we're ready to share information as it comes in, and when is that being shared, and investing in the relationships, right? Campaigns really do deepen donor relationships because you have a chance. Typically, donors are making pledges over a 3 or 4 year period, so there's that time to steward those relationships and thank people multiple times for helping to maintain the momentum going forward.
Mhm. So, before we get to the close of the session, we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. We have Amy asking us, do you have recommendations for donor fatigue?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's a sensitive issue. Again, many are donors to arts and cultural organizations are not only supporting your organization, but they're supporting multiple arts and cultural organizations in the community. There might be other campaigns that are competing, and so it's about acknowledging that. I think it's about building that relationship and trust with donors to understand if they are fatigued and they're telling you that that it is time to pause maybe and to just build on that relationship. But I think it needs to be understood specifically with donors and not just assumed that donors have fatigue. And we want to just, I think, again, having that compelling case for support can change somebody's mind. I mean, the donor might be fatigued by just the annual support and wanting to being asked every year to increase that support, but they might really, find one of the pillars of a campaign very, appealing to them and wanting to move that forward. So the best way is what good fundraisers do, and that's just build relationships with the donors so that you have trust and understanding.
Mhm. So we have a question from Sarah where she asks you, can you talk a little bit about your experiences with partnering with another organization for a capital campaign and how that might or might not work?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I have personal experience with that, but I have seen it. And I think, again, it's a little bit about when I was talking about having board, staff, everyone aligned around the goals. It would be making sure that both organizations are aligned around the goals, and that there's shared ownership of that moving forward. It would be a lot of trust on the staffs of those different organizations. So again, I think just up front, everybody coming to an understanding that these are the goals of the campaign. This is how it's going to support this organization. This is how it's going to move the other organization forward.
Awesome. So we have one more question from Glenn. Do you have suggestions for a small organization that is getting ready to release a new strategic plan? And would you like to run a parallel campaign but is worried about staff bandwidth? My hunch is to have an extended quiet phase so that staff can pivot and donors can begin to see that the new plan is starting to gain some momentum.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that. The staff and human resources around campaigns are important because, again, you don't want to just overburden your current development team, who's already have jobs to raise money for the organization annually. This can be, with careful planning, I think, where you can get into a comprehensive campaign so that conversations are happening with donors about both annual and capital potential. And, I have been involved in many campaigns where we did do that, right? I mean, we would meet with donors, we would have an annual ask, we would have a capital ask, and then we usually rounded it off with a legacy ask or a bequest.
So we'll take one last question from Christopher, who asks, do you have a specific approach for high net worth individuals?
I mean, I think the approach is understanding, again, trying to understand their motivations for support. I've found that many high net worth individuals that support organizations want to be asked by peers, not necessarily development staff, or they want to directly have connections with the program staff or the executive director of the organization. And so development teams just need to know the best partners, and that those planning sessions should happen all the time throughout a campaign, or really any annual fund, anytime you're trying to reach larger donors, to make sure that the right person's making the right ask at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Todd. We are drawing towards the close of the session. So, can you tell us a little about how can ACG help an organization and lead a successful and sustainable campaign?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we Arts Consulting Group, we conduct campaign feasibility studies. We support campaign planning, financial analysis. We can step in to do an audit of the development team, resources, technology. We work with organizations to shape that case for support and test it with donors. We often do interviewing, around on what's being tested as part of the feasibility study. We look at, again, staffing, technology, volunteer structures, and we can help with board training, making sure that executives and boards are comfortable with soliciting donors or playing a role in a campaign. Not everybody has to solicit, but everybody needs to understand the goals and how they fit into the process, whether it's just bringing in people to the organization and all of that. So we help across the board with revenue for sure.
Thank you so much, Todd, for sharing your experiences and perspectives today. And thank you to everyone who joined us and asked us those brilliant questions as well. As Todd mentioned, ACG is always here to support you in launching your next major fundraising campaign. We'll be back soon with a lot more interesting and insightful discussions on Arts Insights Live. Until then, follow us on LinkedIn for updates. Thank you again for joining us and see you next time.